Night fell over the cobblestones of Via del Corso in Rome in the year 1493. Inside the Vatican Palace, a young girl was seated before a mirror. She was 13 years old. Her name was Lucrezia Borgia. Her long, honey-colored hair was being carefully arranged by her attendants. Rubies glimmered around her neck. But the jewels were not really hers. Her father had chosen them. Her father had ordered them. Her father had prepared them as part of a gift to be presented to another man. That night, her engagement was officially announced. The groom was Giovanni Sforza, a member of the powerful Sforza family. He was 26. What Lucrezia felt in that moment, no one knows. No record tells us. What survives are the invitations to the celebration and the reports sent home by foreign ambassadors. One of them wrote a chilling line: "Tonight it has been decided who shall possess the Pope's daughter." Possess. In Rome, everyone understood exactly what that meant. Even now, more than 500 years later, the name Lucrezia Borgia has never fully disappeared. She has been remembered as a poisoner, painted as the accomplice of corrupt men, turned into a symbol of one of the most infamous families of the Renaissance. But when you turn to the contemporary records preserved in the Vatican archives, a very different outline begins to appear. She was not the one mixing poison. She may have been the one forced to swallow it. This is not a story meant to restore her honor for the sake of romance. This is not an attempt to turn her into a saint. It is something quieter than that. More exact. A careful look at what was done to her. Lucrezia Borgia was born on April 18, 1480 in Rome. Her father was Rodrigo Borgia, the man who would later become Pope Alexander VI. Her mother was Vannozza de Catane, his longtime mistress. Lucrezia grew up as the youngest of 4 children, with 3 brothers, Cesare, Juan, and Joffre. It was often said that of all the children, she was especially loved by her father. But in the Borgia family, being loved did not mean being protected. As Rodrigo Borgia built power in Rome, Lucrezia was assigned a role early in life. The Borgia family came from Spain, and in Italy they lacked deep territorial roots. That weakness mattered. Rodrigo needed alliances, and one of the tools he chose to secure them was his daughter's marriage. Lucrezia was a political asset. Her age did not change that. Neither did her wishes. Records of marriage negotiations begin to appear when she was only around 7 years old. The historian Rafael Sabatini later described documents found in the Spanish archives showing that Rodrigo had been negotiating several possible matches for his daughter at the same time. A child was already being moved like a diplomatic piece on a board. In 1491, when Lucrezia was 11, her first formal engagement was arranged. The groom was the son of the Spanish nobleman Don Gasparo de Procida. But within a year, that engagement was abruptly broken off. Her father had found a more valuable alliance. Then came 1493. A second engagement was arranged, this time to Giovanni Sforza, in order to strengthen ties with Milan. It was a political calculation, nothing more. Lucrezia was 13, and by the next year she would be living with the man chosen for her. The wedding took place in June 1493, and Rome exploded with celebration. The Pope spared no expense. Poets praised the bride's beauty. The city dressed itself in ceremony. But behind the pageantry, something darker had already begun. 3 years passed. Then, in 1497, the situation changed without warning. Rodrigo Borgia and Cesare Borgia no longer needed the alliance with the Sforza family. A new relationship with the Kingdom of Naples had become more useful. Giovanni Sforza had lost his political value. And when Lucrezia's husband lost value, the marriage itself became disposable. There was only one solution: cancel it. Giovanni was swiftly pushed aside, and proceedings began to annul the marriage. But canon law required a reason. A marriage could not simply be erased because it was no longer convenient. So a reason was created. The official claim was that Giovanni Sforza was impotent. Lucrezia was forced to declare that she had remained a virgin throughout the marriage. Giovanni, humiliated and furious, resisted. Copies of letters he sent to influential figures still survive in the Milanese archives. In those letters, he made a shocking accusation. He claimed that Rodrigo and Cesare wanted the marriage annulled because they wished to keep Lucrezia for themselves. The accusation spread like fire. It scandalized Italy. And then suddenly, the record goes quiet. For a time, Lucrezia seems to vanish from the official story. Documents later uncovered in the Vatican archives show that between 1497 and 1498, she was sent to the convent of San Sisto outside Rome. The wording in the documents suggests that her stay was voluntary. Voluntary. But sometimes the silence around a word tells you more than the word itself. Because while Lucrezia was being hidden away, something else had happened. In June 1497, her brother Juan was murdered. His body was found near the Tiber. The killer was never officially identified. But contemporary diplomat Marin Sanudo wrote in a report that many suspected Cesare Borgia himself. Juan had been an obstacle. To Cesare, perhaps the greatest obstacle of all. And that raises a question historians still cannot answer with certainty. How did Cesare see his sister? One ambassador from Ferrara wrote in 1497 that Cesare showed toward Lucrezia an attachment far beyond that of a brother. No document proves exactly what happened, but several independent witnesses, writing at the same time, all noticed that something was wrong. And sometimes, in history, that is how the truth first appears. Not as a confession, but as a pattern of unease. In 1498, Lucrezia was brought back from the convent. A new arrangement had already been made for her. This time, the man waiting for her was Alfonso of Aragon, the illegitimate son of the King of Naples. Lucrezia was 17, and for the first time in her life, something seemed different. By all accounts, Alfonso was kind, not powerful enough to control her fate, not dangerous enough to dominate her. Just kind. Some records suggest that Lucrezia may have loved him. Perhaps for the first time she felt something that had not been arranged, negotiated, or imposed. Something that belonged to her. But in the world she lived in, even love could be revoked. In the year 1500, Alfonso was attacked in Rome. He was ambushed and brutally wounded. The streets that had once celebrated Lucrezia's wedding now became the scene of blood and fear. Alfonso survived the initial attack, but he was gravely injured. Lucrezia did not leave his side. For weeks, she stayed with him, caring for him, watching over him as he struggled to recover. It was one of the few moments in her life where her actions were not dictated by politics, but by devotion. And for a moment, it seemed he might live. Then, one night, men entered the room. They were sent by Cesare. In front of Lucrezia, they strangled Alfonso in his bed. Officially, it was described as an unfortunate turn in his condition, an illness, a complication. But the papal master of ceremonies, Johann Burchard, recorded something far more revealing in his diary. The Duke of Bisceglie died during the night. I am not permitted to write the details. Not permitted. 500 years later, that single line still echoes louder than any official explanation. Lucrezia's reaction was recorded. She locked herself in her room for 3 days. She refused food. She refused to speak. Whatever had been left of her personal world collapsed completely in that moment. And then, as before, the next decision was made for her. A third marriage. This time, the chosen husband was Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. Lucrezia was 22, and once again, she was to be sent away, repositioned, exchanged. The Borgia machine did not stop. At first, the Este family resisted fiercely. The Borgias had a reputation, dark, dangerous, scandalous. To marry into that family was to invite suspicion. The Este court openly expressed their reluctance, but Rodrigo and Cesare applied pressure. Money was offered, political concessions were negotiated, influence was leveraged. Step by step, resistance gave way. And in 1502, Lucrezia was sent to Ferrara. But something changed there. Ferrara was not Rome. The court of the Este family operated under a different kind of order, more structured, more stable, less suffocating in its immediate violence. For the first time in her life, Lucrezia found herself in a place where she could exist without constant manipulation from her father and brother. Alfonso d'Este was not a simple man, but he was not Rodrigo. He was not Cesare. Their shadows did not reach as far here. In Ferrara, Lucrezia began to build something of her own. She hosted gatherings of poets and scholars. She exchanged letters with intellectuals. She became a patron of the arts. Slowly, carefully, she established a presence that was not defined purely by her family's ambitions. The poet Ludovico Ariosto wrote about her. Her correspondence with Pietro Bembo would later be studied and debated, some interpreting it as a form of platonic love. Whether or not that was true, it revealed something important. Lucrezia was no longer just a political object. She was thinking, writing, choosing. But the past did not disappear. In 1503, her father, Rodrigo Borgia, died. Some accounts suggest poison. In the same period, Cesare fell seriously ill. His power began to crumble soon after. The Borgia dominance over Rome ended. The machine that had controlled her life for so long finally broke apart. And yet, Lucrezia remained. She continued living in Ferrara, carrying forward the role she had built there. In her later years, records show that she made significant donations to religious institutions. She supported the poor. She became known not for scandal, but for charity. A different kind of legacy began to form. She died in 1519 at the age of 39, likely from complications following childbirth. Poets mourned her. The court grieved her. But her voice, her own voice, remained almost entirely absent from the record. Most of her personal letters were lost, or perhaps deliberately destroyed. What we know comes from others: her father, her brother, diplomats, chroniclers, historians, men who observed her, men who judged her, men who wrote her into history. And so what remains of Lucrezia Borgia is a silence filled by other people's words. But within that silence, there is still a question waiting to be asked. Who was she, really? To answer that, we have to look not at the myths, but at the pattern of her life. A child, placed into marriage negotiations at the age of 7. A girl, sent to her first husband at 13. A wife, forced to declare her own marriage invalid when it lost political value. A woman, isolated in a convent. A lover, watching the man she cared for murdered in front of her. A daughter, handed from one alliance to the next, again and again. These are not the details of a poisoner's legend. They are the fragments of something else entirely. They are the fragments of a life shaped, controlled, and repeatedly taken out of her own hands. And yet, history chose a different story. The image of Lucrezia Borgia as a poisoner, beautiful, dangerous, calculating, became far more popular than the quieter, more uncomfortable possibility that she was, in many ways, a victim of the very power structure that surrounded her. Why? Because the myth is easier. The myth closes the question. It turns her into an answer instead of a problem. If she was a villain, then there is nothing left to investigate, nothing left to confront. But if she was not, then we are forced to ask something much harder. What was done to her? And who benefited from the story that followed? In 2003, historian Maria Bellonci wrote something that still lingers over every serious study of Lucrezia Borgia. She said that every time she examined the primary sources, she encountered the same question. How much of what we believe about this woman is true, and how much was created by those for whom the truth was inconvenient? There is no complete answer, but there are fragments that survived. Among them, 27 letters written in Lucrezia's own hand, preserved in the archives of Modena. Most of them come from her time in Ferrara. They are practical, administrative, sometimes literary, concerned with governance, correspondence, culture. They do not read like the writings of a woman consumed by intrigue or poison. They read like the work of someone managing a court, someone participating in the world around her with intelligence and control. But there is one letter that stands apart. It is dated June 1519, only weeks before her death. It is addressed to Pope Leo X. In it, Lucrezia speaks of her failing health. She asks for care and protection for her children. The tone is calm, measured, almost distant. And then, near the end, she writes a single line. I have, throughout my life, obeyed many things. Now I obey only God. That is all. She does not explain what those many things were. She does not name the people she obeyed. She does not describe what obedience required of her. She leaves it unfinished. Or perhaps, she could not finish it. I have, throughout my life, obeyed many things. When you read that line, everything else begins to shift. The marriages, the accusations, the silences, the disappearances from the record, the deaths around her. All of it begins to align under a different light. Because obedience in her world was not a choice. It was survival. And that changes the question entirely. Lucrezia Borgia is often asked about as if she were a mystery to be solved, a puzzle of morality, a figure to be judged. But perhaps that is the wrong approach. Perhaps the more honest question is not who she was, but what she was forced to endure. From the age of 7, her future was negotiated. At 13, she was given away. When her marriage lost value, she was compelled to deny it. When she became inconvenient, she was hidden. When she found something close to love, it was taken from her. Again and again, she was moved, like an object, between men, between alliances, between purposes. And yet, none of that became the dominant story. Instead, she was remembered as dangerous, as corrupt, as complicit. Because that version of her serves a function. It protects the system that used her. It redirects attention away from the structure of power and places it onto the individual. It transforms a pattern of exploitation into a narrative of personal guilt. And once that transformation happens, the questions disappear. But if we step back, if we look only at what can be verified, at what was recorded by those who watched her life unfold, then something else emerges. Not a villain, not a saint, but a human being, placed inside a system that demanded obedience at every stage of her existence. And that raises a question that does not belong only to the Renaissance. What does power do to those closest to it? What happens when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who decide your fate? Lucrezia Borgia cannot answer those questions. She took most of her experiences with her into silence, but the traces remain, in diplomatic letters, in fragmented reports, in a single unfinished sentence written at the edge of death. I have, throughout my life, obeyed many things. That is what survives. And now, more than 500 years later, the responsibility shifts, because history has always been told by those who had the power to write it. But buried within those records, between the lines, inside the omissions, there is another story. One that was never meant to be heard clearly. This channel exists to uncover those buried stories. So if you've stayed until the end, you've already done something important. You've listened to what was said and to what was left unsaid. If this story made you question what you thought you knew, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more records like this, waiting to be uncovered. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what part of Lucrezia Borgia's story stayed with you the most? Because even after 5 centuries, her story is still being read.